Tonight on Huckabee, Iraq falling apart.
It is in our national security interests not to see an all-out civil war inside of Iraq.
What should America's role be?
American combat troops are not going to be fighting in Iraq again.
Tonight, top military minds take us inside the war room to break down strategy, tactics, and the big picture in Iraq. And outrage. A suspected Benghazi ringleader gets constitutional protections from the Justice Department. Kansas Congressman Mike Pompeo tells the governor why he's furious. Plus, sinking poll numbers and stagnant book sales. Have Americans had enough of Hillary Clinton?
Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Mike Huckabee.
Thank you very much. Great audience here today. Thanks for joining us. And welcome to Huckabee from the Fox News studios in New York City. Well, for the past 12 weeks, we've followed the plight of 16-year-old Justina Pelletier, who was taken from her parents and handed over to the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families in a dispute over her medical condition. I am delighted and relieved to say that Justina is now finally home. That's after a judge ruled on Tuesday that she ought to be returned to her parents. Next Saturday, I'm going to be talking exclusively to Justina Pelletier. It's going to be her very first television interview since her release. Justina Pelletier and her family will be my guest next Saturday. You do not want to miss that. Well, I keep hearing that America is polarized between Republicans and Democrats, and that's true among the ruling class. But the real polarization of America is between the people who live among the elites and powerful and those who are sick of seeing the double standards applied in this country. I'm mad about it, and I think so are most Americans, whether they're Democrat or Republican. I know darn well that if the IRS audits me, I'm going to have to produce written receipts from 2009 to prove that I really did make a contribution to the Red Cross. But I'm watching Lois Lerner and 6 other IRS executives claim that their computers conveniently crashed and they just can't recover the emails that might reveal just how corrupt the criminal enterprise called the IRS truly is. Now, to use that government agency's power to step all over the average American or with groups that might have a political view that some government goon doesn't like ought to result in somebody going to jail, but not a taxpayer. No one, not even decent and sincere Democrats in Congress, can believe the nonsense of the IRS officials claiming the dog ate their homework. Now, we'd go to jail for that. They get taxpayer bonuses. Plus, we've got a president who might as well be Minnie Pearl saying, "Y'all come," and opens our borders to anybody who can get a foot across. We're giving diapers and formula to people who rushed here illegally, while single moms in our own country are struggling to feed their kids. A person can ignore our immigration laws and get medical care, while our own veterans are forced into a bureaucratic cesspool called the VA system, in which veterans are getting left waiting, and bureaucrats get bonuses for cooking the books and manufacturing the records. Then big shots who got an Ivy League education and make $100 million a year running their companies into the ground, they get a government bailout to keep them afloat. But the people who sweat through their clothes every day, lifting heavy stuff, they're getting their wages and benefits cut. But as long as they bail out the boys that keep writing those big political checks, don't think this administration is going to hold them accountable. The president tells us the biggest problem we face is climate change. Oh, and he blames us because we drive cars to work. But he flies on Air Force One at the cost of about $182,000 an hour, goes out to the West Coast to make a speech, do a fundraiser for gay activists, and play golf at Palm Springs. And he will expel more carbon in a day than most Americans will in a lifetime. We fight wars with other people's kids, since less than 1% of Americans will ever serve in the military. But we keep sending the same folks again and again to take bullets and step on bombs for an irrational foreign policy that punishes friends like Israel and tries to make nice with tyrannies like Iran. We let 5 of the most notorious terrorists loose. but then keep your kids locked up for a nonviolent drug possession. Gasoline prices, highest they've been in years. But instead of getting oil, gas, and coal out of our own American earth and then empower some working class families with affordable energy, we get lectured by the president on energy use, even while he's squandering billions of our tax dollars, giving out cash to his political cronies, who then take companies like Solyndra into bankruptcy, but only after living large on big salaries and producing absolutely nothing but more federal deficits. Oh, there's polarization, all right, but it's not Democrats and Republicans. It's the people who make the rules not living by the same rules as the people paying for the rules. And we're sick of it. This weekend, the militant group known as ISIS took over the Iraqi border crossing in the town of Al-Qaim, making it easier for supplies to come in from Syria. Meantime, Iraq's Mehdi army held military parades near Baghdad after Shiite cleric Muqtada el-Sadr called on the militiamen to defend holy sites. On Thursday, President Obama held a press conference to lay out his plan in response to the crisis in Iraq.
At my direction, we have significantly increased our intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets so that we've got a better picture of what's taking place inside of Iraq. And this will give us a greater understanding of what ISIL is doing, where it's located, and how we might support efforts to counter this threat.
All right, to get a better visual idea of what the president is talking about, we're going to break it down. The threat posed by the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and what the role of the 300 American military advisors is going to be. So here to guide us through the strategy and the tactics, two of our trusted military minds, Fox News contributors, Major General Bob Scales and Lieutenant Colonel Bill Cowan. Gentlemen, it is a distinct honor to have you here, and I want to just jump right into this because Americans are hearing about what's happening, but I'm not sure they understand the geography, the strategic value, and so, General, let's start with the big picture of what's happening in Iraq, and why does it matter to somebody living in Nebraska?
Okay, Governor, let's just start with the map, and let's start with 2011 when all of this started. It was then the administration decided to pull out all U.S. troops in 2011 and leave no troops behind, no residual force behind in Iraq. And it wasn't just the fact that our soldiers were leaving. It was the fact that all of the infrastructure, all of the intelligence, all of the stay-behinds, all of the friends that we'd made in Iraq were literally ripped root and branch from that country beginning in 2011. And for intelligence purposes, the country went black.
Is it fair to say that we didn't just leave with the renters? We took the plumbing and the wiring out as well. So we had nothing left to even know what was going on.
We took the whole house.
Okay.
And right after we left, almost immediately, Maliki, the president of Iraq, started to completely rip the guts out of the Iraqi army. He took the good generals and replaced them with his Shia cronies. He stopped supplying the units with gasoline and spare parts. And so the Iraqi army started on a downhill slide that continues to this day. At the same time, many of you will recall the terrible civil war that started in Syria in 2011, and that's when we first see ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and they conducted a 2.5-year war against the Assad regime. And during that time, they went from a rabble, if you will, a sort of Al-Qaeda drone, into something far more sophisticated and dangerous. They learned how to fight. They sorted themselves out and came up with good leadership. They brought in foreign fighters, some of them from Europe and the United States. Now they're well equipped. They have a great deal of money. And then all of a sudden, beginning on the 10th of June, ISIS turned their attentions on Iraq. First thing they did is that they took down the second largest city, Mosul, and literally overnight, the Iraqi army, 4 divisions of the Iraqi army, simply disappeared. And over a period of 7 days, Governor, or over a period of 7 days overall, they completely blanketed northeastern Iraq, destroying most of the Iraqi army. In 2 days, they moved 230 miles.
Let me just interrupt because I want to get the Colonel in here. Tactically, Colonel, to move that much military that far, that's not something that just happened out of luck, did it?
Not at all, Governor. The two things at play. One is these scenes of people being beheaded and shot and executed, as many people have seen on television, was certainly something those Iraqi soldiers were watching. But more importantly, there had to be some kind of infrastructure. From the time they started moving from the border in Syria over through Mosul on down south, moving that quickly meant that they had taken the time to put some kind of support mechanisms in place. They'd done their reconnaissance. They knew where they wanted to move and why. And it really showed a long-term strategic plan, not something that just happened overnight.
How bad are these ISIS guys? Because, I mean, we're hearing that these guys make al-Qaeda look like the folks you would invite over to dinner.
They are absolutely diabolical. They're probably the most sinister and evil terrorist force that we've seen in the last 100 years. But it's not al-Qaeda's. It's like al-Qaeda. This is not just terrorist groups. This is an army. This is an army that has good leadership, they're well-trained, they're combat experienced, they're being paid by many of the Sunni states in the area, and they have a terrific infrastructure in the Sunni part of Iraq. Just take a minute. The part that you see here with the ISIS logos on it is called the Sunni Triangle, and it runs all the way from Aleppo in Syria down to the gates of Baghdad. So as they moved south along the Tigris River and destroyed these Iraqi units, they replaced them and they moved into these towns and villages outside of Baghdad and started to turn them into what, God forbid, will eventually be the Sunni Caliphate in Iraq.
Colonel, before we get to the break, which we've got to go to right away, just on Saturday, Al-Qaim was taken by ISIS. Why is that important?
Yeah.
This is their strategic target. They've taken it. What does that mean?
Al-Qaim's extremely important, Governor, because it's the primary gateway for the movement of goods and supplies between Syria and Iraq, all the commerce, but they've also used it now to move some of the vehicles that they've captured, military vehicles, Humvees, perhaps some tanks, back over to Syria for their fighting there. And it's also a way for commerce to continue to flow into this area as they gain control over it and develop their own
infrastructure. This is like taking Laredo, Texas, and that's why it's an important thing to see that they've captured this. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about how the president's sending 300 U.S. military advisors to Iraq. What's their job? And are they going to be enough to halt some of the bloodshed? The Colonel and the General and me. We're back right after this. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show and share with me your thoughts, I welcome your response. Go to my website, MikeHuckabee.com. You can connect with me on Facebook, sign up to follow my regular messages on Twitter, or leave comments on the feedback section at MikeHuckabee.com.